what makes a compelling interpretation. As musicians, it's what we spend the most time doing, or at least we should. How do we arrive at a musical decision in a way that we can be sure will make our phrase more convincing to our audience? Do we even need to think about it? Why can't we just be intuitive and express as we feel in the moment? Isn't that enough? So let's look at the first step of interpretation, exploring the score. We hear from musicians and teachers all the time, you need to know what's in the score. But what does that really mean? How can it help? So often I find that students have looked at the score, but the information there is not reflected in their interpretation. There is a lack of understanding how the score's contents informs a musical decision. Think of the score like the landscape in the set of an opera. The set immediately dictates the mood of the scene. Are our surrounds a mysterious forest, an imposing castle, or a joyous, bustling street? Is it day or night, stormy or sunny? The details in the set influence the characters' movements and frame their feelings and interactions. Our surrounds, including the weather, affect our mood. We feel different when we walk through the countryside than when we're on the tube into the city. So the landscape of a set gives an emotional backdrop for the narrative to unfold. Similarly, a score gives us a landscape in which a narrative takes place, and your solo line and you are that narrative. The details in the score give us clues as to how we might interpret our part in a way that makes sense with what is happening around us. Like in an opera, you, the protagonist creating the narrative, must react to your surrounds. So the first step of exploring the score is to look at the micro to macro structure. Try to get a sense of the macro structure, the large structure. Very simply, where are the different chapters or sections of the movement or the piece? If it's in a sonata form, that means recognizing the exposition, development, recapitulation, and coda. Perhaps it's in binary or ternary form. The form simply gives you a sense of where you are in the journey. Are we hearing material for the first time? How do we feel hearing it for the second or even the third time? Perhaps we feel more emphatic or more reflective, more nostalgic. The drama of a development sometimes means we feel a sense of relief with a return of material at the recapitulation. Recognizing material from the exposition and how this has been treated by the composer in the development helps one connect characterization across a work. When looking at the larger structure, you can also note general tonal areas to get a sense of how far away we stray from the home key. This often affects how much tension is built and how much relief we feel when returning back to the tonic or home key. Once you've gotten a general overview, choose a section of the piece. Look at it, pencil in hand, and ask yourself simply, what do I notice? What is actually happening around my part? What is interesting? What is potentially significant? You're simply being a detective and circling details that appear interesting. Circle anything you notice, even if you're not sure if it's important. Just the act of noticing it and acknowledging it will give you more clarity and enhance your listening. Now I'm going to go through areas that you want to consider and try to notice when you're looking at the score. We're going to look at harmony, texture, tessitura, that is the relative pitch of your part and the orchestra, dynamic and rhythm, orchestration and instrumentation, and markings in the score. You can listen to a recording, but I would suggest you focus on the orchestral or piano part rather than the solo line to get a sense of what the instrumentation, harmony, and rhythm actually sounds like. Remember, you have to notice and hear it in order to react to it. Let's have a think about harmony. Don't be intimidated by harmony. You don't have to be an expert in Schenkerian analysis to hear harmony in a meaningful way. Harmony is simply emotion. Even if you're not good at analyzing chords, you can still hear and react to them. Listen for dissonance and consonance. Dissonance is expressive tension, and consonance is release. Through transitions and contrasts of keys, we can experience a huge kaleidoscope of emotions, from all the drama of grief and yearning to comfort, affection, relief, and homecoming contentment. When we are aware of a key, and even its emotional associations, we can try to more actively reflect that in the intensity of our sound. During the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, keys were used by composers for their emotional associations. This began in the Baroque era and was known as the doctrine of the affections. In Beethoven's F major Romance, for example, we are taken through tonal centers that distinctly dictate the mood. The F major opening giving a pastoral peace and contentment. F major was a key associated with the benign good side of nature and our contentment within that. So think of wandering through a beautiful green pasture with trees and the gentle warm sun on your skin. As we progress through this journey of the Romance, we arrive at F minor, representing storm and conflict. Here the sound could be more dense, accented, and energized. D flat major after this feels warm, intimate, and tender, which I create with a lighter tasto contrast. C major that follows was a key that represented majesty and radiance, and this gives a sense of bright optimism. The F major return after this entire journey is a sense of homecoming and reassurance. So this is an example where the keys are clearly delineated and give a strong sense of the musical feeling and character. Even if you can't identify all of the chords in a piece, try to identify tonal areas like this and consider the emotional associations of those keys. You can find various descriptors for keys from the 17th century by Googling the doctrine of affections, or if you have time, look at the treatises of Matheson, Rameau, or Quantz. Also, in your exploration of harmony, look for what is happening at structural points. The end of an exposition, the end of a development, the end of an A or B section. Look for dominant pedals or the first sniff that we are heading towards a cadence. We want to sense the implicit tug towards a point in the line or the structure and find a way of reflecting that tug, that tension, in the color or sustain of our sound. We may notice chromatically more complex areas and might sustain or build musical tension with our sound as we are taken further from the home key and thus become more desperate for resolution. In the first movement of Brahms's G major sonata, for example, after a turbulent development, the return of the first subject in our home key of G major feels like a huge relief, a little like the homecoming of our Beethoven Romance. It's also, as is often missed by violinists, instructed by Brahms to be a return to the faster tempo of the opening from the slower sostenuto or held back tempo of the development. The sostenuto in the development feels like we are weighed down emotionally with a heavy heart and somehow held back through this turbulent journey. A return to the faster tempo at our recapitulation gives a sense of the shackles being removed and we are free again. So here's how the development begins. Very, very turbulent. And we're taken through a long development, and eventually we find ourselves winding our way back, increasing in tempo, shackles removed, to the recapitulation. So that's such a feeling of homecoming and relief when we return to that beautiful, tender theme. Look for what notes in your part are consonant with the harmony underneath, and what notes are dissonant. Baroque through to late Romantic period music is full of appoggiatura and suspension. Recognizing a suspension means you can add an expressive tension to the sound, leaning into the dissonance. The beginning of Mozart's A major violin concerto, the Adagio introduction, is a great example of how dissonance is created through tension of suspension and appoggiatura. Listen to how I give emphasis and tension in the sound during these suspensions, and how I lighten the resolutions. So here we have the seventh of the chord. I lean in. I lighten the resolution. Here we have appoggiatura on dominant harmony. Still dominant harmony, but tonic harmony resolution. 4/3 suspension. And now a surprise F major chord. Before our resolution. So, in other words, the dissonance and consonance of that Adagio introduction really helps me to shape and feel the tension and resolution in the sound. Another example is in Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto. In the first movement, we sustain a top G, and during that note, there are 3 harmonies underneath. We need to hear those harmonies and change our sound to reflect those harmonies. We can hear how our top G begins its life as the 7th of a chord underneath. So the passage I'm referring to is this passage. And that long G. So when we first arrive at that G, it's functioning with this chord underneath. But as the 7th, the next bar, the harmony changes to this chord. It's actually a diminished chord. Before that G becomes the tonic of a G major chord. And that evolution we can reflect in our sound. There's a lot of tension in the 7th of a chord. So when I begin the G, I can really lean into the sound, creating tension in that sound. Continue leaning in during the diminished, and as the note becomes the tonic, lighten and add the vibrato. Now that would be more effective, of course, if I had the harmony whilst I was playing. But it does give a wonderful sense of resolution as that note melts at the end and gently drifts down to our second subject. There are, of course, endless examples in the repertoire. As all music consists of dissonance and consonance, it's simply a matter of hearing and reacting to it, ensuring we are actually changing our sound to reflect what is happening.